Yeah, look, it's very important. I mean, I grew up in a pretty conservative part of Sydney, and I've got to say that as a teenager, I didn't know anybody who was gay. My parents didn't have friends who were gay. I mean, there probably were people who were gay, but it wasn't something that I was aware of. The first time that it kind of went across my radar was when one of my friends at the beginning of high school, her father came out. And it was actually this really traumatic event for everybody, as you know, the breakup of a family always is. But it was kind of like, you know, he came out, he moved out of the house, it was this big scandal, it was this huge trauma, and we never saw him again. And that was my experience as a kid of what it meant to be gay in my community. I was going to weddings of cousins and family and friends, and these were big events in the calendar. And that was the kind of thing that was, you know, my parents didn't have to say to me, we don't want you to be gay. That was obvious from the, I guess, you know, what I had growing up. And, you know, it's a while ago now, but I know that there are people who are going through that still. And I hope that my book can speak to those people and to kind of go, I mean, I guess this is one of the things that I love about young adult fiction and why the books that I read as a young adult stayed with me and, you know, I still think about them a lot, is that they have the potential to show you possible ways of being that perhaps you haven't thought about before. And it wasn't something that I had thought about before until much later.
And Jared, I know you've spoken about the influence of seeing a particular play that made you realise that some of the big issues of your life could be dealt with in literature or on stage.
Yeah, that's right. Like I went to the Adelaide Fringe Festival and saw a play called Funerals and Circuses. Had Paul Kelly composing the music, and for me, I was only 16. I saw that play and went, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to write theatre. And I did do that for a little while and then soon transitioned to writing fiction. In Adelaide, there's 700 Aboriginal university students enrolled at present. I was kind of like the second wave of Aboriginal students going into tertiary education. So when I'm writing, I want to write those stories that I didn't have when I was going through those phases of leaving the country as a 16-year-old kid, going to university, because our kids are aspirational. We have so many issues within our communities. We're aware of them. We need our kids to be strong, and we need non-Aboriginal people who are doing great things with us as well. So I'm trying to kind of present some of those possibilities.
Yeah, and I know one of the things I think is really interesting is, you know, particularly in your culture, this idea of masculinity and the rights that you go through growing up. The experiences of being male and the responsibilities that come with that are obviously something you explore with Calypso, your main character. But I wonder if you could talk to us a little bit about what it's like to feel those pressures as you're growing up, thinking about masculinity, thinking about responsibilities, and then how you felt about trying to put that onto the page.
Okay, well, I think pressures around masculinity are there for all kids, of course, and in our society it's all around physicality and mostly physicality and the use of machinery, whether it's skateboards, bikes, power tools, trucks, cars, etc. And if you can't get those things, you will go and take them. So there's an element of criminality that comes into that expression of masculinity, and whereby a lot of our kids end up in prison, because if you can't afford to get those things, you'll go and take them anyway. Sorry, can you just repeat that question a bit?
Well, that's quite interesting, but I was thinking particularly about Calypso, in a lot of ways has quite an approach. Some of the building blocks that some people think of as very easy, like I'm going to leave school and get a job. For him, there's actually extra challenges in that, and there's more responsibility that comes with it because he has to, you know, help to provide for his family and think about these bigger issues that other kids just can kind of breeze through. Yeah,
absolutely. Like in my family, obviously a lot of my relatives are darker than me. So when I'm with them in public, if I go into a space, a hotel or something like that, I'm immediately treated different. when I'm in their presence. So I've seen this my whole life, yeah? So his colour is a real disadvantage to him when he's in Adelaide, and his real goal is to work within a sports retail shop, and it's really impossible, and he ends up getting work in a kind of new age shop that he calls Mystic Dolphin, which sells health food products, because he looks the part. So he's really adopted this Rastafarian facade through his love of Bob Marley, etc. So yeah.
And in your characters, we've got two really quite complex and really interesting female protagonists in both of your books. And they're very different, and I love them both very much. And I wonder what you think about some of those challenges, and perhaps when you're writing female characters, the responsibility that you feel for that to be authentic in a way that is kind of sometimes missing for girls, particularly in the teenage years. There's either this kind of kick-ass heroine who is like extraordinary from within, but quite often the stories about, in your book, for example, Erin, a pretty ordinary girl, but maybe facing extraordinary circumstances are a little harder to find. And same for Claire, your protagonist.
Well, I like writing girls because I don't understand boys. I grew up not liking sport and really struggled with the public's kind of round peg kind of whole things for boys and what they had to be, and I just never fit into them. And still massively privileged as a white straight bloke, but just didn't know how to understand boys. So I like to write girls, and I wanted Claire to be a black girl in a world where colour is no longer a problem, where there are different prejudices in play. And I wanted her to be not a superhero. I didn't want her to have superpowers. I didn't want her to have, a destiny. I didn't want her to be the daughter of anybody famous. I just wanted her to be an average girl whose only special power is that she's really, really stubborn and really loyal. And that's not always a superpower. Sometimes that's a curse. She spends the entire first book trying to save her friend at any cost, and then makes a mistake, and the mistake is so massive she has to spend the second book kind of trying to pick up the pieces, and that's what life feels like to me. You try so hard to do the right thing, and you
really get a sense that she struggles with her choices. In a lot of other books, it seems like someone is like, well, this is the clear moral answer and I will follow that no matter what. But with Claire, you get a real sense of her going, I don't know, how am I supposed to know when I'm, what the right thing to do here is?
Yeah. I mean, the colour's completely turned up in a science fiction novel, in this series anyway. It's completely turned up, but the kind of choices she has to make about what it means to be her and what is right, and who she should kind of shackle her decisions to, what kind of person, and her inbuilt prejudices, kind of come to the fore when she meets and likes a boy who is the underclass in that world, who is the big nerd, who kind of is me. So.
Yeah. I love Jesse. He's great.
Good. I love Jesse too.
Yeah. And Erin, it struck me when reading your book that yours is one of the only YA novels I know with a queer protagonist where the story isn't about coming out so much as it is the everyday choices around disclosure, about coming out, about what you say and who you say it to, whether you're safe in an environment to talk about your sexuality or not even talk about it, but just not feel that you have to hide it. Was that something you particularly focused on, that you wanted to avoid that coming out story and just talk about the realities of kind of what it's like to live with it?
I think when I first came up with the idea for The Flywheel, I was actually quite young, and it was years before I wrote it. And at that point, I had this idea for a fun story, and I was like, I'd really like to put a lesbian protagonist in it, but I just didn't know how to write that kind of lesbian protagonist that I wanted to write, which was somebody who was really self-determined. And the reason why I couldn't write it was because I didn't have that for myself yet. And so by the time I got round to writing it, I feel like, I've been able to bring those kind of years of being out as a gay woman to that, to have that character who is comfortable. But her self-determination in the book is not... it's not all cheering for her. She has to kind of realise that not everybody is as comfortable with their own identity as she is, and that actually places her in some quite serious dilemmas within the book, particularly in terms of her love life. So I kind of, I wanted her to be self-determined. I wanted her to be fierce, but I also wanted her to be flawed and to have to kind of recognise what her strengths were, but also what her weaknesses were.
And I think in all of your books there is obviously a big central struggle, and there's a big, thank you, a big question that each of your protagonists are dealing with. But ultimately, the stories are much more about how these individuals feel when placed in extraordinary circumstances. Some more extraordinary than others, some a whole other world and pulling it apart. But I wonder if you think that really at the heart of your stories, you're more worried about the person than you are necessarily the issues? Or do you think that the issues are come at by exploring it through a person's ideas and how they struggle with those kind of bigger concepts?